All right, we are being recorded, and welcome to our community practice call on part of our topic tributaries of Holacracy, kind of paying homage to all of the many methods and models that Holacracy either got some inspiration by, got some pieces of it by, or language by. There's a number of different pieces here in this topic, and today's call is on integral theory in Holacracy, looking at how that influenced the early days of Holacracy's development. And to aid me in that, I've got Dennis Wittrock with us. Dennis, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
You're in Bremen today, I take it.
In Germany, right? That's north of Germany. If you know Beck's beer, that's a famous town I'm from. It's brewed right here in my living room. No, just kidding.
I will be over there with you just in a few weeks now. We're doing a workshop out there, and I've got a couple of trainings we're doing over in Germany. And all of that being largely thanks to your initial efforts to help get Holacracy over in Germany. So it's nice to have you on one of our calls here to introduce you to some of our broader audience. Dennis is pretty central in the Integral community over in Germany. And involved in, I'm not sure I can pronounce the the name of the organization, the Integrale Forum, and I guess,
right?
Yep, Die Integrale Akademie.
Yes.
And yeah, cool. So, well, Dennis, welcome. I think maybe just to get us started, just sharing a little bit of history of how we got connected, and I think that's kind of pointing to some of the history of Holacracy and the integral movement as well. And then from there we can see where it goes and see what topics pop. So anything else you wanted to say, just to introduce about your background and what you're up to before we start?
No, that's fine. Maybe share the story of how I met Holacracy, or how I got to know you, which was back, I think, in 2006, one fine day at a... Can I name the place, or?
You can now. It's enough time. It's been 2 years. I think it's safe.
Okay. Back then, it was the early days of Integral Institute, and I was assigned up there as a volunteer, and for a 3-month period. And someday there was a paper was sent around the staff, and it was, I think it was an interview in one of these early papers where you explain Holacracy, and I thought, wow, this is intriguing, and it was sent out in preparation for a presentation you were about to have at the office, and yeah, it kind of sparked something in me, and it was. Yeah, I was very interested to see this live in action, and then I think you did a simulation there, and explained the whole process, and yeah, it was a very, that was my start, my introduction to your work, and it kind of it left an impression. So later, I invited you to Germany and so on, and the rest, I think, is history. So,
yeah. Well, that's why I thought you'd be the perfect person to chat with about the history of Holacracy as it relates to Integral, being that that's kind of our history of getting connected. And it was just to fill in some of the pieces of the story around that. Back before that, before I ended up presenting at Integral Institute, must have been 2005 or 2006, sometime around then. I was still running the software company that was the initial experiment ground for a lot of what has become Holacracy. And about the same time as that experimentation was going on, and we were really building out the early days of the system, I read some books on integral theory, and that was kind of my introduction just through the books at first. And I thought, hey, wow, this is well, really cool, really explanatory of a lot of things that I had kind of experienced but didn't have the language for. And then, aside from the kind of personal impact for me, it was really interesting to look at what we were doing in our organization through this lens. And I remember, it was it explained a lot. It gave some language to some things we were doing that we didn't really have any distinctions to articulate well with. And even in the name Holacracy itself was thanks to integral theory, increasing my own understanding and that of the folks I was working with at the time in the early days of this process, to the language around holon, holarchy, that just had deeply informed the way we thought about or talked about the organizational structure. It was pretty intuitive from what we were already doing, but it took it up an entire notch and gave us some more distinctions about holons and holarchies that we could take to the structure. And it was through all that I was kind of curious to get more involved in this, to see who else was interested in this stuff. And I went to a little weekend workshop that Integral Institute put on, and that's actually where I met Tom, which is my business partner now in HolacracyOne. We met at that weekend workshop. He had the same kind of thing. It was his first exposure to that movement, and decided to show up and see what happened. And we got connected there and really hit it off. But shortly, or at that same event, actually, that same event I met Tom at, I also met several folks that worked at Integral Institute, colleagues of Dennis's at the time, or at least those who would be once Dennis started his work there. This was maybe just shortly beforehand, I think. And several of the folks there, as I started just talking a little about Holacracy, I think they were talking about organization, and a lot of what integral theory at the time especially said about organization felt like it just missed something. Although I love the theory itself as a lens to look at organization through. I remember reading, some of Ken's work, and it gets to the part on what's integral organization or integral business, and it was just so hollow. Of course, because it's the meta lens, but it hadn't really been used that much to look at that segment. And so I said something at the event. I said, well, yeah, you could just do this, and that gets more aligned with integral theory, and started talking a little about what we were doing. And all the folks there from Integral Institute kind of stopped and looked and said, what? Now that sounds really interesting. Tell us more. Ended up going out to lunch with one of them and just talking about it a bit more. And I remember at the time I was kind of shocked. Like, this was still before I realized that what we were doing really was all that interesting and special beyond our own walls. So it was kind of interesting to me to see that these folks were actually interested in this. I thought it was kind of a cool thing we were doing, but more for us than anything the rest of the world might actually find value in. And I just assumed that other innovative progressive companies were probably doing similar things. And it was through that initial interchange that they got interested. I talked to them more about it. That inspired me to write that document that you referenced, Dennis. And it was through that meeting I thought, wow, well, this was really cool, and I'd like to tell them more than I got to face-to-face. I wrote something up and I sent it to one of them, which apparently got sent around and became more than I had originally thought it would be. And through that dialogue, then there was the invitation to hey, come on out and talk to us more about this. Maybe we can do something with it. And that is folding into your story. That's how we first met. It was in that presentation, and I remember I was still almost confused and really enjoying the experience. It was still in that, wow, this actually is pretty cool to these folks. Like, it was still hard for me to believe that what we were building and crafting was really all that, interesting at the time, but it really was to the folks that we were talking to at Integral Institute. And the other side of that is, it was through those dialogues and those early presentations that I really started to understand myself why. It was like this was right about the time where my own ability to language and make the distinctions that Holacracy now embeds so thoroughly, the early ones anyway. It was through that engagement that I started understanding why they thought it was so cool. And that actually fueled more of the development of Holacracy by understanding what in here is so special. And the more you understand that, the more you can say, oh, well, that makes sense. How do I enhance that? And it was in that exchange process of dialoguing and explaining and ultimately helping Integral Institute run with what we called Holacracy, but in hindsight, I'd say it was like Holacracy version 0.9. Started version numbering it. It's well beyond that now. It bore little resemblance to what is now the current version of Holacracy, but the roots were there for sure. The seeds were there. And Dennis, remind me, it was that initial presentation. Were you there during the early rollout of that as well, or had you already gone back to Germany by that point?
No. I gone back to Germany to that point. So, but I found it interesting that before the approach was kind of like I think I remember the line. I think Ken saying, "Yeah, what's integral organization? Basically, what we do is nobody knows. So we put together like 20 second-tier people in one room and watch them. It's like see what they do. It's like and kind of like that kind of describes also pretty much what happened there. But as far as I can tell, but yeah, I think your approach was very well received and very welcome as a new impulse, and I think anybody, and it kind of deeply resonated with so much so in the integral space. So I think that's also why we talk together today, because if we talk about integral, then there's a lot Holacracy is and represents that resonates deeply with integral values, what I would call, or features of the integral structure of consciousness. So, and that's also my my guess that basically it stems from that structure, whatever that structure is. We can have a closer look in soon into what that means. What are we talking about if we talk about integral? So that and I've prepared some points in advance, you know, where that strike me as being integral features of the practice of Holacracy, and we can go through them or discuss them. And
yeah, I was actually just thinking this would be a good segue into some of those, maybe with the framing of the question. And this, for me, was my question at the time when I first got it introduced to Integral Institute and the folks that were deeply in this theory. That, yeah, I read a couple of books, but it wasn't really something I had consciously used to build Holacracy or anything like that. I had perhaps borrowed some language constructs and some understanding of holons and all that, but really hadn't used it much consciously. And then when I went there, what I found was all of these folks that were really interested in this theory saw something in Holacracy that really grabbed them. And what I'm curious is, what did they see in Holacracy? From your perspective as somebody deep in integral theory, when you look at Holacracy through that lens, what is it you see?
Yeah, first of all, in the processes, there's a recognition of holacratic structure. For example, so you recognize natural holakeys, you try to rebuild them or build them consciously with the circles and, you know, all these holons that make up an organization, if you will, starting with, I don't know, if you go to down to next actions, to projects, to roles and accountabilities, and up to teams and circles of circles. So that's kind of a yeah. This is a real holacracy and mirrors the structure of reality as seen from the integral perspective. And so that's one thing. And what struck me most was this process of integrating perspectives, especially the integrative decision-making process, which was a kind of technique, a technology for that. What integral is all about taking the most amount of information and perspectives, and not mushing them all together, but carefully integrating all these perspectives into a coherent whole. And that is, I think, what this IDM process is doing. And
yeah, let me jump in there if I can, Dennis. Just something triggered for me as you're talking about that. And I remember back in the early days of working with the folks in that community, and still to this day, as we get many folks interested in integral theory showing up in our events, one of the things that I think stands out is, well, what I witnessed at the time, and I've seen this in a lot of groups that are explicitly interested in integral theory, because there is an awareness of the value of multiple perspectives and of integrating multiple perspectives, but a lack of a practice for integrating multiple perspectives. What ends up happening is getting stuck in consensus and what I have cutely termed the tyranny of consensus. And I think it's fascinating, and it's often from folks that they know better. But what else do you do? If you don't want to shut down and crush perspectives, you value multiple, you understand the wisdom of integrating, you do the best you can to try to integrate all of them in a healthy way, but what you end up stuck in is it becomes very personal, because it's each person making sure that I'm not stepping on anyone else's personal perspective, and it devolves right down into consensus without a structure and a process and some rules of the game to hold it. So I see a lot of interest in integrative decision-making specifically for what it does around that.
Right. So what it, in my view, or in terms of integral theory, it would be like what I saw early on. It was that it was really providing a lower right structure of model for and the real process in the exterior world to that also has, of course, has correlations in all the other quadrants. So if you, but first of all, you change the rules of the game. You change the what we call it, the nexus agency of the we. You implement new rules for verbal behavior, you could say. So that is, you're installing the new operating system in the lower right. So so people speak differently and follow different rules of procedure, which creates a different intersubjective space in the lower left and a different experience in the upper left, and of course a different verbal behavior in the upper right, and also then following from that on also different behaviors within the organization. So that would be like a quick walk through the quadrants on integral decision making, and so in his new, or in his latest work, Ken Wilber focuses on methodologies. So he's talking about integral methodological pluralism. What a word! But so what he means is, it's not only about making theories about the territory, but also about enacting the territory. And the enactment, for an enactment, you always need certain procedures, and that is practices. You need a practice if you want to know your inner world. Then that's a good idea to meditate. If you want to know how fast a car is, you need to measure it or whatever. And the same is true, I think, if you want to know what integral organization is, do things differently, and then see what this creates. So I think that the main entry point for Holacracy is really the lower right, and then from there on it reconfigures all the experience in the other quadrants.
Yeah.
How's your take on that?
Yeah, no, that resonates. It's I always think it's missing something when I see meaning making with an integral lens saying, Holacracy looks like a quote a lower right thing or whatever, and it seems like no, that's off. That way of understanding it doesn't work. I like the way you put it, though. It's like there is an entry point, or it's like where the first domino is, or something. It's the trigger, the spark. Yeah, it uses the lower right to bring the entire system to a new tier of organization, of being, of culture, of the whole deal. And it is doing it through a leverage point in a lower right structure. It's using that as leverage to spark a whole system shift. And that really resonates. And it's I loved also how you said it in experience. One of the other things I see, it's not a cognitive thing. And in fact, I see Holacracy often challenges folks that have a more cognitive relationship with their understanding and ideas of, quote, being integral, and there's also usually some attachment to that in some form or other. And often it challenges all of that by forcing an experience of this new tier of organization, this new structure, this new way of being and being together and working together and expressing results together. And that to me is fascinating, including myself. I mean, I still feel it. In no amount of cognitive awareness and understanding gets me out of the messiness of experience and of living it. And yeah, all of those really, really resonated. That's
really what I love about Holacracy. It's not only talk, and you can really, that's really something you can do, and it's a completely new emergence also in your experience, because that's also if you look at past modes of decision making. You can see with integrative decision making that it's a completely new thing. It's totally different from anything we know, and it also transcends and includes the best of the previous modes of decision making. And I like the way, I think when we were in Frankfurt last time, you said it ends the warfare on what could call the subtle floor of. We're going here. We've become very esoteric here, but the idea is that you once, or maybe you want to explain the idea.
Yeah,
it was yours.
Add to it as I go. It was this was. Referring to some of Terry O'Fallon's theories, who kind of has done some really interesting research and theory building work on extending Suzanne Cook-Greuter's development model, specifically looking at other ways of kind of understanding and extending the different stages that model looks at. But anyway, one of the things that I really loved about Terry's work is she talked about almost redefining what we might think of as tiers in this development structure. There's a tier where we humans in our development are grounded in the gross reality, where this is developmentally up through the stage diplomat in that model, and then in comparison, the stages expert through strategist in that model would be grounded in those stages are about expressing this subtle floor and the realm of mind, in other words. So she pointed out that really it's as you're moving through that first tier, the gross tier, it's really integrating more and more the realm of the gross, of the physical, of the body, and that whole development trend. Then there's a leap at expert to the realm of the mind and reaching into this realm of concepts and ideas and extending through that all the way up to strategist, which has mastered that realm. And then the leap beyond strategist is a leap to the causal floor. And she points out there's almost an ego with each one of these, which is interesting. And just looking at some, I realized that's a crude whirlwind tour. If you're interested in her work, check out her paper that was presented at the Integral Theory Conference. It's really well done. But one of the interesting things looking at just that concept, when I look at human society historically, there was a time not that long ago where we had coliseums as sport, gladiator fights, and it was like the struggle in the world was all around that gross physical selves conflicting. You walked around and if you're intelligent, you carried some kind of weapon if you could, because you never knew when somebody would jump out and challenge you in a physical self level. And And the beauty of our modern societies, we've created a societal structure and system that stabilized a space where we don't have to worry about that much anymore compared to going back, a couple thousand years ago. We walk around a modern, town. I can take a jog out in my neighborhood and not really worry about carrying a sword, or a gun or whatever with me. And yet, what do we have today? We have now, in the realm of the subtle, violence is a sport. We have debates, where we are conflicting with our subtle, our mental selves. We are, my ideas versus your ideas. When we found the company, we have our heroic leader who gets to dominate others, who gets with his ideas now, not physical domination, but dominate with his ideas, his mental constructs, his mental models, all of this stuff rules, and it crushes and suppresses others. Yeah, the subtle ego, exactly. And all the way up through, developmentally speaking, strategist, which is in many ways where that is really fully mastered, and yet is still there. It's almost the height of the subtle ego in a way, and the most graceful expression of it at the same time. And one of the things I think Holacracy is doing, which is fascinating from that frame, is building an environment where we no longer need to conflict and fight violently with our ideas, our mental models, our mental constructs, and instead can exist together in another realm. And let all of those ideas naturally, let us own them, have an autonomy without a challenge to our subtle self. There is no challenge to your ideas. You don't have to fight to defend yourself in a way mentally. It lets all of that be, and lets whatever is useful in that be integrated, while each of us can own our own stuff and keep it out from affecting the organization stuff. So in many ways, it's creating a ground in which subtle egos are no longer competing and violent towards each other, but rather integrated towards something next. So that's just one of the... Yeah, go ahead. What's that?
Yeah, I see a kind of a parallel to integral theory, or also Kant's work, is trying to make space for all the perspectives, and ending intellectual warfare by integrating perspectives, such with orienting generalizations like the quadrants or the levels. These are concepts that help us to create room, enough space, mental space to let all the truths, to invite all the truths to the table, and that is that's the intellect.
Yeah.
Right. So who's right, Buddha or Freud? You don't have to decide. Both are right in their domain. It's like, how big do you want your universe to be? Do you want a small universe, and then there's fight? And then I think this is the analogy to Holacracy, and with the differences that. It is a practice not only for it's not only an intellectual practice. It's a practice for an organization, and you can do this. What Wilbur does, in some ways, is he's following an integral paradigm in the intellectual realm, but you can also follow an integral paradigm in the organizational realm. And I feel that is what Holacracy is doing. So
it's a beautiful way of putting it, and I really like that holding of one of many possible meanings of the word integral is integrative in the sense of holding space for lots, so that we have. I loved how you put it, a bigger universe. And I think what Holacracy does, which is paradoxical and yet pretty beautiful to me, it holds a space for all of us with our mental ideas and all of this stuff, a big universe for it, while at the same time not getting so just drowned or drowned out and lost in that we can't produce anything in our world together. So it lets all that be while still focusing and harnessing the best of whatever we can offer towards expressing a purpose together in the world. And in fact, the two are related. It's allowing a bigger space so we can bring our full selves to the table with all of our ideas, all of our thoughts, without having to fight or show up with fear of being dominated in that way. And it's doing all of that so we can get more richness and harness all of that for the sake of evolution further unfolding in some purpose together. which is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's a cultivation also of transpersonal states for the ego, beyond the ego, for the collective. So it's kind of like, yeah, as you say, it holds the space for individual egos, and creates a state where nobody's really threatened, but yeah, and everybody can show up and bring their gift. So that's really, yeah, the very valuable contribution of that, the process.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm curious, what else do you notice from an integral lens when you look at holacracy? What else jumps out?
So if we take the elements of the Aqua model, you can recognize that it integrates, as we said, it integrates people at different stages of development. That means, if we talk in terms of spiral dynamics, somebody at blue finds value in it, likes the structure, the rules, the clarity, and somebody at orange finds value in it, loves the many options and the flexibility, and that he or she can produce excellence with this model. And green loves that everybody's heard and everybody's perspective is appreciated, and the integral people just love it naturally, I'd say. So it creates a space for many people along the developmental spectrum, and it only takes them to be able to follow the rules of the game, and that's available at diplomat level of development. So it's a capacity that is pretty much available for everybody. So that is the integration of the levels of consciousness, and I think there's also, as you pointed out, the integration of types, of personality preferences, and that is, I think, what was your initial question as you set off this journey in the beginning. How can we make room for different styles of people, and how can we integrate all the richness of existence and what people perceive as centers for the organization? How can we make use of that information and without prioritizing one type over the other? And this is, I think that was nicely reflected in the facilitated training. I can remember when there was this exercise where all these different type preferences, or people from different type preferences, were asked, okay, what aspect around the practice resonates most with you, and which doesn't? And then, interestingly, there was like there was different types relating to different things in the process, and resonating with them, kind of going along with the other things, but kind of resonated with with this specific practice, and there was something in for everybody. So that is quite remarkable.
Yep.
And so it integrates typological preferences and abilities. Yeah, and also what struck me was when I at some point compared like many integral approaches that and tried to find a common pattern between them. There was one thing that came out, is that there was at second tier there's I think Claire Graves called it a dramatic decrease of fear, and I think Gebser also mentioned this, Gene Gebser, one of the pioneers, and also Ken Wilber, in some ways, that at second tier, a lot of the tiers that we hold, a lot of the fears that we hold in the first tier, like status-based fears, or much of the fears that get the attention of the ego, simply drop. And I found it interesting when I looked at Holacracy with its principle of dynamic steering, which made fear obsolete. And I found this an interesting marker of second-tier consciousness, devising a system that makes fear obsolete and or unnecessary. And with dynamic steering, you can rely on your present moment awareness. And this present moment awareness, by the way, is also a marker of increasing capacity for states, which is, I think, also at the integral level, you can find more often in people that the people are interested in different altered states of consciousness. And in Holacracy, this displays as non-ordinary states within the process of decision making, where something different is happening. The voice of something else is, or there's a space where something else is coming into the equation, and you can call, whatever you call it, if you call it the voice of the organization, evolution, eros, or spirit, or whatever, there is an openness in the model, in the system, in the process for this kind of emergence, and that is kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. It's reminds me also of something Terry O'Fallon pointed out in her extensions to adult development theory as well. She talked about the beautiful presentation at Integral Theory Conference last year or the year before, or whatever. She talked about the integration of states and stages, and has a model of how those interweave in a way, or interpenetrate, in her word, in a just a beautiful extension, I think. And one of the things she points out is what at one stage of development is an altered state becomes an ordinary state as development continues. And this goes back to her idea of different floors of consciousness, if you will, where in the early in development up through the diplomat action logic in that model, it would be an altered state to be tuned into subtle concepts, ideas and theories, and to really be in a space where those are objects in awareness is an altered state. It's not an ordinary state. And yet, most of the people attracted to Holacracy don't experience it as an altered state to be able to dwell in this realm of ideas and theories. It's a quite ordinary state. The subtle floor has become integrated and ordinary. And that starts at expert and is then developed and continued throughout that tier all the way through strategist, where it's it's integrated, mind-body integration. The subtle floor is just readily apparent. Theories and ideas and thoughts, these are all subtle objects in that model. And one of the things I see that's Holacracy does is it creates a pull towards another ground, which is allowing all of even those to kind of drop away to that present moment awareness of what's arising in reality now, what am I sensing, and how am I going to respond to it. The conscious approach, consciousness, being able to sense, become aware of, and choose a response. And so it's that present moment awareness, it keeps pulling us back there. So it has that interesting effect, I suspect, of pulling back to what for most people is an altered state experience. For those that have integrated that to it being a regular piece of wakeful consciousness, then it's aligned with that, and it's allowing an organization that doesn't limit the expression of that or put a ceiling on what they can bring. And I think that has some really powerful pull. Combined with the holding up a mirror effect that Holacracy has, where when we are stuck in something, an attachment somewhere or whatever, it just keeps holding up a mirror and making you see it. So there's the making subject-object thing that Holacracy tends to do through, in many ways, integrative decision-making does that. It helps you see when you are stuck, helps you tease apart something that is an attachment of yours versus what are you sensing in that attachment that's of value to the organization's purpose. All of that gets kind of teased apart through this process that we engage in. And even outside of the meetings, when Holacracy is done well, that same process is at play because of the clarity of what role am I in, what role am I speaking from, what is this tension I'm sensing, what do I do with this tension? Is this about me? Is this about the organization? It's usually about both. How do I tease that apart? What goes where? There's the whole practice continually reflects this. So there's that's why I've heard several people say it's like a meditative practice, and one you're living in organization every day, which is I think pretty interesting. It's making these altered states. It's bringing them in and continually evoking a state that is beyond the one we often get stopped or stuck in our modern organizational paradigms, where we're competing for the best idea and the predict and control constructs to try to force reality to be what we're attached to it being, as opposed to flow with reality, sense what's emerging, and choose consciously how to respond in every moment. It keeps pulling us back to that floor, and I think that has an interesting effect. You spend enough time living in that state, spend enough time constantly being pulled back to that state, and what does that do? I think that's an interesting piece, and it's not all rosy. I mean, it could make you crumble and collapse. I mean, it can challenge every aspect of self identity. It's not all positive in that way, and yet it's evolutionary, which, judge it positive or negative, it'll still have its way with you.
Yeah, there I can see a kind of a parallel to a formal meditation practice, an individual practice this time, and whereas Holacracy can be described as a collective practice. So individual practice of meditation, you also have this process of making the subject-object and continually letting go of your ideas about how reality should be, but instead coming back to how reality really is, come back to the now or whatever, what have you, or all these, this is present moment awareness, which it's like, I'm wondering, do you still meditate, or is it you don't even need meditation because you have like constant meditation within work, or is it? I was just wondering how working in an environment it's really pushing this and making this non-ordinary states ordinary. Is this also, do you feel like this has an effect on your personal individual center of awareness, or is that is it as catalytic as one might imagine it would be?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'd love to see some more studies or something on that over time. My anecdotal sense is it is catalytic is probably the word, although what it catalyzes might be more of a up in the air question. It does something, and for some people it is rejected, and rejected violently, and it is not what they're interested in or ready for or whatever, and that's fine. It is what it is. But so it's catalyzing something, even if that something is a push back, reject, push out, and close it off. And sometimes it catalyzes something that feels quite profound. Sometimes it catalyzes a collapse. This is my own experience. As I was towards the end of my stay at my software company, for me, and it was, I think, largely credited to being in this kind of practice that we were still developing, but it led to a complete collapse of my own self-sense and self-identity. It was a very difficult couple of years for me, and this was years ago now, but it was... It poked holes in everything that I thought I knew and everything I thought I was even, and so that was really difficult, and yet it was catalyzing. And in the ashes of the crumbled sense of self was an opportunity to rebuild a new sense of self and to find something different and a new way of being and interrelating in the world. So in that sense, it was very catalyzing, and yet. that's never an easy or comfortable process when it's truly powerful. And for others, it might be more comfortable. For others, it's exactly what they're ready for, wanting, looking for, and it just helps them pull everything together that they were previously wrestling with. And I think it is catalyzing, but catalyzing of rejection is equally as possible. And in terms of
yeah, same goes for meditation, I think.
Yeah.
If people start this practice, they think it'll be sweetness and light, and mostly not, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
It'll catalyze a lot of your own shit, and basically bring up things you don't want to look at the first, But if you stick with it, magic can happen again. I mean.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that does also. And I don't know. We need to get more data points on this, but I believe that a lot of the value that people get out of a meditation practice, they will likely find in their day-to-day work practice through living in Holacracy. They may or may not still find meditation valuable. It may be that it's just too much at that point. They're getting enough of it. It might be that it really helps them, step back from the actual hands-on active stuff. I don't know. I do find that I think there is more of a chance, anyway, that people will find meditation no longer as useful. But I would never don't want to imply that as an across-the-board statement. I think for some people it might be exactly what they need to process the experiences going on. It really, I suspect, depends on the person. Though the other thing that makes meditation, I think, not as useful is simply development. Going back to Terry's theory, if she's right in that, and my tendency is to think she's quite right, and I'm sure missing something. But she points out that in the 4 stages past strategist, there's an integration of that new floor in a way that is likely to make meditative practices, at least as we know them, not as useful. And that's a simplification, but it's bringing in the kind of state change that most people experience in a meditative practice more into day-to-day reality. Not that there isn't still other state changes to be found in a meditative practice. There probably are. But that itself, I think, will make it less useful. So if Holacracy potentially catalyzes more experiences that tend to shift stages, or at least give people more experiences of operating in a new ground, that itself might change the nature and value of a meditative practice. Or it might increase it if it can be used then for other purposes. So I don't know is the short answer.
My hunch is that both practices might be very complementary, so that engaging in the one will help you in the other, and vice versa. So, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So anyway, so other indications for Holacracy being an integral practice. So when you look at spiral dynamics model from Claire Gray, from Don Beck and Claire Gray, based on Claire Gray's work, and you will find descriptions of the integral level there, the yellow V meme, as flex flow, and flex flow meaning being able to utilize or make use of all the previous structures and behaviors, just depending on what is needed now. And I think that perfectly fits with the integrated decision-making process as the threshold for other styles of decision-making, for autocratic interventions, for democratic interventions, for whatever you want to do. You're free to create the structure you need and want at that moment. So that would be for me an indication from that model. Another thing I see or find interesting is what kind of intrigued me first time I read your paper was the overall arching vision of what Holacracy could be. That thrilling part of meta-mesh working between organizations, and here we have a blueprint of what it could be. What I think when I first read about the turquoise meme in Spiral Dynamics, there was this meshworking term, and what I find valuable about Holacracy is that you get a real hands-on practical approach that is, I think, also grounded in legal constructs now. So that you can make use of and start building really fractal, self-organizing wholes that span larger scales of focus. So that is a fascinating aspect, I think, of the practice, and I'm very curious how that will play out in the future, and how that might look like on a planetary level at some point. So that's, I think, really a feature that also ties in with the holons and hola keys being natural, or connecting natural units, or natural evolutionary units, and I think that that is what another indication for the integral nature, if you will, of this model.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think one of the other things that's at play here that it does, and in addition to allowing that the natural holarchies, the present moment awareness, all of that to come together, the grounding under all of that is the idea of what the organization's doing, and is expressing an evolutionary potential. So at the root of all of this is the why, and it's moving us beyond mind even in that. So the definition even Holacracy uses of purpose is a little different than what I think we often think of when we hear the word purpose. I think, generally we hear the word purpose, and for most people what it brings to mind is, what purpose do I decide on from mind? In other words, what do I want in my noblest, highest, whatever, but still it's a projection of mind. What do I think is good, is better, is, and all of that is coming from mental constructs. Versus what Holacracy really tries to shift to is, forget about all of those judgments, all of those mental models and mental constructs and on purpose. Let's get down to evolutionary potential. What is trying to emerge? What is next? What impulse is there to create at play that this organization can harness and be a part of expressing? And that is it's not a mental construct. It's pre-mind. It's before we get involved and start having our ideas and projecting our mental models on reality. It's just at the root of what is the impulse here to spark, to create, to evolve something. And it's trying to align everything with that, which is an interesting shift underneath all of this now. We're not trying to do this integration, this integrative process, this build an organizational holarchy all around something that is itself a mental construct. We're trying to do it around something more, and this is where language starts really getting difficult. But we're organizing around an evolutionary impulse, an evolutionary potential to create something next by sensing into, based on everything we've got going on right here and right now, just what's next. And no judgment, just what's next. What's trying to emerge? What is this organization's unique potential to bring something new to life? And that may match up with our mental constructs and our desires and our whatever, but it is not from them. There's a resonance, perhaps. You want the resonance, but it's not applying them. It's the other way around. It's finding what the pull is, and then finding our resonance and our pull to that. While still recognizing that what is the potential that's there is going to relate to our mental constructs, because that's part of the reality of what's around the organization. So it's a really subtle thing, but it is another big shift. And I think it's one that's often both a source of challenge and appreciative opportunity, especially for those that are in are in a space where they have in many ways mastered mind. They've got to a space where they have really complex capacity for systems thinking, for seeing what is needed. And what Holacracy does is say, that's great, drop it. Don't let it go, bring it. Bring it towards something else, but don't dominate from it. Don't push that on. The organization is not here to do what you think it should do. It's here to do what is natural, what's trying to emerge. It's to facilitate that purpose. And then you can bring everything you have to offer and all your complex thinking to help that along. But it's not starting there. We're not doing something from mind. And that goes right down to the floor of when we look at cross-organization and governance structures across organization levels. That's the new ground it's pulling in. It's not just, let's take our big ideas of how the world should be different and how government should work. It's getting past all that and saying, let's find something else as our core baseline and build up around that, and something that isn't still coming from even the best of mind. I don't know. I'm trying to find language for stuff that's hard to find language for. I don't know if any of that's coming across.
Yeah, it's kind of radical in you dropping and really being non-attached to your own concepts and ideas about reality, and holding a space for evolution to arise, and for reality to show up in ways that are not expected or not pre-planned or figured out or whatever. So that is also very intriguing about this practice, and I think very unique among the things I have seen so far. So yeah. Wow. So it's really a place for newness and evolution and creativity, and creating an opening. That's really the picture here, I think.
Which
holding space.
Yeah, which ironically is exactly how Holacracy itself continues to develop. We're about to release, either today or tomorrow, we'll have version 3.0 of the Holacracy Constitution shipped, which represents kind of a new version of Holacracy itself in many ways. And the interesting thing is the process of developing that is not one that starts from mind. It uses mind, for sure. It's really cognitively intense. But it's not from that. It's the process of developing Holacracy is not one of thinking and cognitively and even from mental concepts and models figuring out what's next. It's rather clearing all that out of the way and just noticing reality. And then building a structure, using mind as my tool, not as my master, using mind to figure out something about what I'm already sensing, and to build a structure a little bit to stabilize that. But it's a process of clearing it all out of the way, not of using it. It's not, a design process at all. It's a listening process. And it's fascinating to see even that evolve Holacracy itself. So Holacracy is not something anybody is creating now from mind. It is something that we are maybe describing from mind and trying to tune into and explain and convey, but it's a listening process of what's needed in reality. What is the evolutionary spark for Holacracy itself to continue doing what it can do in the world and bring something new, novel into existence? And that's the same thing for every organization.
Yeah, I think back then at the facilitator training when we in Amsterdam, when we talked about new emergences, I think we briefly discussed whether this is really a new life form emerging, so to speak, the organization as the next layer, if you will, in this array of layers from physiosphere to biosphere to noosphere to what's next? Is it an organizational layer emerging here, something with a life of its own, for sure, but is it really the new playground for evolution to express itself, making use of us? That's very interesting. Some people speak of a higher we or something, and it's I'm skeptic about this because I think the quadrants co-evolve. So a higher we takes a higher I. So, but anyway, it's a fascinating time to be alive with all these new emergence.
Yeah, and I definitely have some new just thoughts on that, since it's been a topic for me that's been continually percolating. But since we are out of our time block for now, maybe we can use that as a teaser to something to dig into when we're together out in Bremen, and we're doing a 2-day workshop on holacracy with integral theory as an explicit language to bring into that space in that workshop. So this is perhaps a topic we can continue in person, since we'll have a nice casual 2 days. It's basically a 1-day workshop over 2 days, so we can go really deep and do a lot of cool stuff. And if anyone's listening from the area, join us in Germany. And let's call it a wrap. That's a nice teaser to end on, and perhaps an invite for a future dialogue in some way. So thanks for everyone for joining us and sharing your comments as we went. And Dennis, thanks especially to you for joining me. And it's always fun. Hours fly by like minutes. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next month.
Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dennis. Have a good day. See ya.
Bye-bye.